feast horror stories and how to learn from them. I'm Lou. Some of you have met me. Some of you hadn't. And so the reason I wanted to hold this course is so that we could talk about things that go wrong at feasts. Okay, and what you should learn from them. Because let's face it, okay, who out there, and I want to see a show of hands, has done feasts without something going wrong? Without anything ever going wrong?
Just once.
Jenny, you couldn't even keep a straight face.
Well, no. It got really delayed, but I planned for that. So I guess something did go wrong that one time.
Well, in my now coming up on 34 years in the SCA, I'm older than dirt. I have been in charge of 63 feasts and helped with upwards of 400. And I've seen everything that could go right. And I've seen everything that could go wrong. Would you like an example to start out with here tonight? Okay. Well, and this is not, I was not cooking this feast. I'll say this one. I was in charge of the event. And the cook, God bless and love them, brought out these beautiful cuts of meat the night before. Beautiful. And was talking about how they were going to cook them and how they were certainly better cooks than anybody else at the event. And so they put out these cases of meat the night before the event. They put them in the coolers to thaw. Okay? And we're talking about maybe 120, 130 pounds of meat. Big cuts. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And they wanted them to thaw. And so they put the cases right in the cooler and wanted it to thaw. They put them there about 5 o'clock in the evening. So the next morning, we're just kind of wondering where they are, because remember, they tell us that they are professionals. They'll get everything done right. 9 o'clock, nobody's in the kitchen. 10 o'clock, nobody's in the kitchen. Coming up on noon, they show up. That's when we hear, oh, we're professionals. This will all work out right. And they start unpacking the meat. Well, guess what? It was frozen solider than a rock. Okay? So, what do you do with frozen meat when you need to cool, when you need it to thaw? Well, in my case, I would have considered some warm brine or something like that. That's not what they did. They took a microwave, a standard kitchen microwave, and started thawing all this meat in it. And they thawed it, and thawed it, and thawed it, and thawed it. And about 2.5 hours later of the stuff trying to be thawed, we hear, it's still all frozen. Well, turn it up higher. Okay, and they did. And they started thawing again. An hour later, we start smelling ozone. And it's coming from the kitchen. The whole kitchen smells like ozone. And we suddenly hear, oh my God, it's on fire. And the feastocrat, or feast, I know it's feast steward now, but it's feastocrat then, comes rushing out to me and goes, my budget just went up by 300. I'm like, why? Don't even ask. And he rushes off. Well, the next thing I know, he's running back with his Amana radar range box from the Target. And he throws out the other microwave oven. It has done so badly. There are holes burnt in the door. That's how bad it was. And that's why I call that dinner, anytime anybody asks, the feast of the living microwave. Oh, let's see here. There's some chats out there I was just looking at. So when we hear stories like that, what do we want to do? We want to figure out, oh, yes, somebody said, did they ever serve any meat? Well, yes, they did. I will gladly tell you, yes, they did. And it's just amazing what happens when you serve. Well, what they did was they basically, you know, those torches you use to light grills and light flamethrowers and things like that. Well, that's what they did. They laid the meat out and they ran it over with torches like that. Okay. Oh yeah, they did. And then they sent it out to eat. Well, guess what? It was raw inside and frozen still. It's just a good thing that there was a Kentucky Fried Chicken only 5 miles away. Sorry. But remember, they were professionals. Oh, so that sort of thing always brings to mind what the stuff you need to do when you're doing planning or when you want to talk about events. For example, in terms of planning, you need to plan that when the food will arrive. You need to know, you need to cook it ahead of time. You need to know how long it's going to take to thaw. You need to know how long it's going to take to cook. You need to plan things out, and clearly they didn't. Okay. There was one other problem with the hall that they didn't check on. And the hall itself, not the kitchen, but the hall didn't have any utilities. They'd all been shut off for some reason or other, and we couldn't get them turned on. Pre-book cook? Yeah. Pre-cook? Yeah. That's another thing to look at. Now, the utilities had been shut off in the hall, so all the extra grills and things like that they'd wanted to use in the hall, they couldn't use. They hadn't checked things. They hadn't checked the site. They hadn't done proper recipe selection. They hadn't done any of their pre-work properly. And that's what you need to do. You need to do a lot of pre-work. Now, okay, who has a story? Raise your hand if you want to tell a story. Okay, Ginny, I'm going to unmute you here.
Right, whoops.
There you go. Go ahead.
Okay, hi. My name's Mistress Gwyneth. I'm from the Middle Kingdom, and I've been in the SCA for 38 years. And most of that time, I've done feasts of various types and quantities and qualities and everything like that. And I've built cooking teams across different kingdoms, and have worked in different kingdoms and kitchens and things like that. One of the things I want to bring up is the concept of having too many cooks in charge in the kitchen. I was involved in a major anniversary event recently here in the kingdom, and we had a crack team of top-notch cooks who wanted to put on the ultimate dream feast. And it was ambitious, to say the least. It was a wonderful sight, but a very ambitious attempt at trying to do all the things at once. We had recipes tested left and right. We had budgets, we had recipes, portions, everything like that. But what happened with the perfect storm of the event is there were too many people in charge, and someone wasn't really playing traffic cop and directing. So, and you also had a lot of celebrities in the kitchen, you know, with incredible talent, but an incredible ego. So there wasn't any one person who was directly in charge of anything. So I was part of this team, and I decided from the outset to have a very small component of it. I'm very good at compartmentalizing, so I was going to do my thing and get out. So what happened overall is there was a lot of moving parts with this feast. They wanted to have this elaborate cross-cultural feast that's Italian and Turkish and this and that. There are a lot of conflicting themes. You had people, there wasn't really as much problem with the food itself. The food itself was delicious. It was delivery and timing. So you had people who were at this event. They wanted to do the low table Turkish Middle Eastern sit on the floor thing. They had one of the people at the table thing, and then you had very confused servers going what goes with what, where, and everything like that. So from a logistics point of view, from a food quality point of view, it was fantastic. From a logistics, getting it out of the kitchen into the tables was a complete nightmare. You had confused people. You didn't have anyone playing expediter or traffic cop, just basically keeping the food going. So what would have been a tremendous theatrical dramatic experience was an absolute train wreck. And because it was, there's like you had it just seemed like, it sort of fell apart once zero time happened and trying to get it out on the feast. So you had there was just a lot of conflict going on, not really animosity. It was just a lot of chaos going on
that event.
and all that. So I think the lesson learned from there is one person has to be in charge, and someone has to basically get it from point A to point B. And then when it's go time, someone else has to come in with second shift and expedite, and the cooks have to step away and get out of the way. To make sure that the food is delivered properly on time, and make sure the servers were educated enough and fed in order to get the food out in a timely manner. It's my experience that you don't want a feast to last any longer than like 2 hours or people get bored. But sometimes you have to sort of accommodate some theatricality and some high theater kind of things in order to pull off a production like this. And so the best intentions, sometimes never survive first contact. So that's a valuable lesson, to have realistic expectations of your staff, your equipment, your site, and to make sure you can actually do this thing. I would almost suggest running it like a tabletop game, where you basically, have a dress rehearsal on paper and see what happens, and then throw disasters at it every, like, oh my God, I don't have this ingredient, or there's no room here, or you have conflicting things like that. So that's sort of my take on doing feasts, where I make sure everything is pretty much planned to the minute. I have crack team of operatives doing exactly what they're supposed to do. I have someone handing it off to the servers and making sure the servers are educated on exactly what they're going to do, and then have a cleanup crew that knows exactly what they're going to do once the dishes come back. There you have a chain of events that's fairly seamless by that point, and you have contingencies for when things go wrong. I think it's better to be over prepared than to not be prepared at all. So that's my advice that I would like to pass on to anybody who's doing feasts and things like that. And so that's what I've got. So thanks, Lou.
Well, actually, that leads into what I was going to be talking about, which was the next section. There we go. The next section I was going to talk about was actually staffing needs. And I was actually at that event, if you remember right. And I also have a horror story along that line, where we were doing a major event, but I don't know if you know, I know some of you know, but the local group here had several major SCA events in a row, starting with SCA 50 year, simple day, and the local group simply burnt out. and it came time to do a major feast and a major event, and the cook is just cooking a huge feast, and nobody is volunteering to help serve. I mean, we tried everything humanly possible, to the point where we started paying everybody's fees to get into the event if they would help serve. And we eventually ended up with about 12 people total, serving about 150 people. And Nicholas Jean, I'm not going to tell you about that event. You know exactly what event I mean. He sent me a private message, but I'm answering publicly. I'm not going to say what event it was. It just was interesting. So when you do plan, you need to learn from stuff like that, that you need to have an underling whose specific job is to do nothing but help you recruit help. You know, have them do that. And when you're looking at that, you need to identify your staffing needs well in advance for this. And honestly, you need to be honest with yourself and with the group as to what you need and what you're doing. You know, that way you learn from that, so it doesn't happen to you again. I was not the feast crowd at the event, and I was not in charge of the event to which I'm referring, which is another reason I won't tell you what. And yes, you were there, Nicholas John. You were there, and you and I were both in the kitchen together at that event, but I'm not going to say what it was. So when you do planning, you need to assess the local group as well, and you need to assess how you get people in. You need to put out the call for help, and that should also figure in what you're planning to serve and how you're planning to serve it. Period. Okay. Now I've told 2 horror stories. Who else wants to tell a horror story? Anybody out there got their hands up? You can put it in the chat if I can't see you. Wolfwind, did you want to tell one? I see your hands up. All right. You need to unmute yourself if you want to tell a story.
Okay. Everybody can hear me all right?
I can, so I'm assuming they can.
Okay. I never know because it doesn't talk back to me. There's no feedback loop.
Beep.
Once upon a time in the woods, I've been cooking feasts since 1978. So yeah, I have many. But one of the things that I learned early on, real early on, like in 1979, 1980, know the interior temperature of your kitchen before you decide to try to make whipped cream. It was in Atlantia in Virginia Beach, and it was July, which is really hot. And the kitchen wasn't air conditioning. It's in one of the oldest Episcopal churches in Virginia. No AC in the kitchen at all. I'm trying to make whipped cream in a copper bowl in a bed of ice. And I did not achieve whipped cream at all. But we had fresh butter for the bread because it was not happening. And I never took into account that there's no AC in the kitchen, even though I had cooked in the kitchen a couple of times before. And just, I completely brained it. Yeah. So no whipped cream for the pies, but fresh butter for the bread was, as horror stories go, it's not that horrible. I have many more, but so the learning curve when you're a feast crowd is really doesn't matter if you are a professional cook. In fact, in many cases, being a professional chef will completely blow you out of the water in the SCA. Because, yeah, I've had a few, but it's you have to learn it. We learned it by doing it and making all the mistakes. So what I try to do is I try to teach everybody how to make a kitchen plan, because a successful feast is 99% in your kitchen plan. If your kitchen plan isn't right, then you're going to struggle. And if your kitchen plan is totally wrong, you're going to fail, and somebody's going to have to rescue you. And that's, I've never had to be rescued, but I've done some rescuing in kitchens. Finding feast crats on the floor, weeping with a handful of index cards. This is your plan? Really? Okay. So yeah, we had to learn as we went, and you have to adapt it to every kitchen that you run across, because they're all different. So yeah, Murphy lives there. Murphy lives in your kitchen. So you have to be ready for the oops. That's it for me.
Thank you. You are right. That is one of the first things you have to check, is you have to check the facilities, and you have to have a written plan with a schedule. And I put times when I'm doing things. My staff knows by now that if I start singing that I'm feeling under pressure, and that there's something they need to help me with. Right, Jenny? 'Twas in 1492, Chris Columbus sailed across the ocean blue. All he found was some sand, so he told Ferdinand it's a new world after all. That one? So you are right. You have to check the facilities, and you have to have the plan. Or it won't. Get down, dog. Or it won't work. Now, that goes with one of the other things I had to say here, is when you're checking the facilities and when you're planning for the event, you need to always have contingency plans, and you need to be looking at things other than this tunnel that you're planning on. Okay, you can't be just concentrating on your feast. You have to be concentrating on the whole event around you, so you have a better idea of what's going to occur. For example, I'll give you an idea. There was an event that took place here in Sternfeld about 6 years ago now, maybe 7. And the event steward asked me for the event if I would make some focaccia, because I'm well known for it and I love making focaccia. So I said, oh, how many loaves do you need? Thinking maybe 25, 30 loaves. He's like, oh, how's 100 sound? I'm like, 100? Why? Well, we're gonna have some Boy Scouts coming through, and we want to give them something to take home with them. Like, okay. So I'm baking away, and about 3 days before the event, I hear the weather forecast. And I call the event steward. If you heard the weather forecast, they're talking about snow. He's like, oh, no, that's only a 30% chance. We're going to be fine. I'm like, you sure it does, so don't cut down on this bread a little bit, this focaccia? He's like, no, we the whole 100 loaves. I'm like, okay. 2 days before the event. Ice warnings. I'm like, okay, call him again. I've already got 60 loaves here. Why don't I just leave it at that? He's like, no, we need 100 loaves. Morning of the event starts. And there's a blizzard warning. The event is canceled. and I have 100 loaves of focaccia. Let's see. My neighbors got a loaf every day for a week. The mailman begged me to stop giving him loaves of focaccia. I took focaccia to work. They begged me to stop bringing focaccia. I had 30 loaves in the freezer still the next spring. I had 20 loaves. I took to Penzic the next year. Okay, that'll give you an idea. You can't have tunnel vision when you're planning feasts. You have to have a full picture of the event, and you have to put down your foot on occasion. And I should have, and I didn't in that case. So when you are planning the event, you always have to have some kind of contingency for what to do. If you have, for example, too much food, you need to have planned where to store it if you need to. And one of the other things you can do is, you can give it to food banks. So keep those in mind as well. Now, who else has a horror story they'd like to print? Or does anybody have any questions? Raphael, you said you had a question? Okay, go ahead, sir.
Not necessarily a question. One issue I had, and then probably the biggest issue I had, was I was doing a 12th night, and court ran an hour and 20 minutes long. And that is the one thing that's the variable that there's just no way to tackle it except just keep in your mind how to keep food warm or cold, and just be in that holding pattern, because they apparently had they offered 2 peerages on top of there was a knighting, and it was like, man, this thing just ran long. And luckily I still pulled it off for 120 people, and they were quite happy with the food. My pasta suffered a bit, but one thing on your staff, the people that help you, this is just I've been in a lot of organizations since I was in high school, and the 3 things I always do: I thank each person personally, I thank each one now with social media, I thank them on social media, and I also thank them. So like if we have a citizens meeting, I actually mention their name and I give them praise within our own circle of our own group. And because of that, my last feast, I had to turn away like 20 volunteers because I just had enough people, and we're talking startup, feast, and shutdown, cleanup, and I still was turning people away. Because I run a fun kitchen, I think that's part of the attraction, is we do this for fun. This isn't, let's be a slave for a day. So, but anyway, those are the little tidbits that I think really helped me out.
I know Nicholas Jean had a comment on this, so I'm going to ask him to unmute here.
Yeah, it's not really a horror story, but more like how not to treat your help, which goes kind of dovetail from what was just said. One of the early events that I helped on, I was actually on a serving line. We were doing it buffet style, and that's where I signed up. Then I got asked to go into the kitchen to help out. Well, they had the feastocrat, feaster, whatever, and then the sous chef, or whatever they're called. I mistook the assistant for the one in charge. The one in charge immediately jumped my case big time about it. I said, okay, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. What do you want me to do? She kept reiterating that she was in charge in different variations. I kept saying, I'm sorry, what do you want me to do? Finally, I just said, I'm sorry, what do you want me to do? She goes, I'm in charge. I go, and then I just repeated myself very minutely and detailed. I was out here, I was doing this job. I got asked to come in here. I repeated the whole conversation that we had. And I go, what do you want me to do? I can leave, I can stay. What do you want me to do? And finally, somebody else, I'll private message you, came in and said, here, cut carrots. I cut carrots. They were in the kitchen. I overheard some of what was talking. Finally, somebody else came to me very meekly, because, you know, I kind of have an attitude sometimes. If you cross me wrong, I know, right? And she goes, could you deliver this to the serving line? I said, yes. And he goes, not to hurt your feelings, but we really could use you out here. I go, that's where I was wanting to be anyway. So I went out there, served. Moral of this story, I never helped that lady again. She needed help. It wasn't going to be me. I don't hold a grudge, but I do have boundaries, and I will not put myself in the firing line of your attitude.
You know what I do in that case, Nicholas John? Please do me a favor, go ahead and go back on mute if you would, please. In that case, I go up to somebody and say, hi, my name's Master Sweeney, Sweeney Todd. Nice to meet you. Now I do know that that Wolfman did say something earlier about dishes as well. I'd like to add to something she said. She said, never serve anything in the first two courses that can't be whole and be reheated. Never. I myself, one of my own rules is I always start every dinner with a soup. Always. The first course that always goes out is a soup, because that can always be reheated and held. And I wait until they give me the actual signal that they're going to be moving to the hall before I put the other courses in for the final cook. That's one thing I do. You're absolutely right when you're talking about that, Raphael. When you're talking about needing to plan like that, it really does help, because you know it's always a matter of planning and getting that contingency plans down and getting everything done. I remember serving dinner once at 11 p.m. at night because court ran that long. The mid-realm is notorious for long courts, aren't they, Jenny? And considering that you and I both have most of the awards that make court that long.
You know, there was a time in our kingdom's history where we had court after feast, and then it changed because people wanted to go out to dinner after court. And it's like, so, you know, eventually the crowns changed it to having court before feast. So those who wanted to go home after court could go hit the restaurants and Burger King and whatever else, and the rest who wanted to actually stay for feast could stay for feast or get to the other site where feast was. You know, there was also a history in our kingdom where we had events with two sites. You had a fight site, you know, day site, and a feast site and all that. But it's been a long time since I've been to events like that, where there's been two different sites for the same event, you know.
Well, who else has a horror story they'd like to share? Anyone? Philomena, go ahead and unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi, fellow Tremarian here. Hey, Megan. Hey, Wolf Mom. Probably my first 3 feasts that I did for Trimaris or in our local group, it became the running joke that if I had a fully functioning kitchen or no problems with the feast, I probably wouldn't know what to do with myself. But I think the most, I don't know how to say infamous, but the one that we had the biggest trouble with was the day of the feast or the day of the event. The feast steward had food poisoning or was violently vomiting and being ill, and I had to send him out of the kitchen. I was mentoring him. I had to send him out of the kitchen and send him home, but he had not been a good mentee despite reassuring me that he had, and he had no binder, no timeline, no schedule, no written recipes with him on the site. I got a hastily scribbled on the back of the site schedule or the event schedule about a half a dozen sentences, hastily scribbled while he was trying not to vomit, and then he left the site. And I had a freezer or a fridge full of ingredients and a couple of scribbled sentences about what his plan was. And we had feast that night. So we made it work. We had a lot of people who stepped up and helped out, but it really brought to mind that even if you're mentoring somebody, I learned a valuable lesson is give them homework and make them show it to you, because he kept reassuring me, oh yeah, it's great. Everything's fine. I'm working right along. Everything's all the whole plan. I'm okay. You know, I don't want to bother you. I don't want to, you know, micromanage you. This is your feast. I'm just here as a mentor to help out. But it really said next time ask to see it, because, you know, I had to pull off a feast the day of with 6 sentences scribbled on a piece of paper, and a kitchen that was run down and had we were cooking in hotel pans on the stove because they didn't have pots big enough to cook in. So that's another thing too, is if you're going to the kitchen, see what they have as far as implements and pots and pans and things to cook with, because they had no big pots. We were using hotel pans directly on the burners as pots to cook in because they had nothing. I had to send people a half an hour away to the Walmart to buy like basics like sponges and soap and, you know, towels and everything, because they just had nothing, and he hadn't bothered to check with the site to see what they had. So I like literally stepped into nothing and a sink that was falling apart. And
Oh, yeah. I understand completely. Most of you have heard my story of the exploding pig anyway, so I do a bad food blog. I'm not trying to advertise it, but I do a bad food blog, and I put some of my fun SCA stories out there. One of them has to do with the fact that a kitchen crew never planned properly, and so we had to cook a pig over hibachi. Oh, let me, that actually goes into something else that I was thinking, that I was going to want to touch on this evening. And that is, when we're talking about events themselves, you've got to be realistic about budgeting. And one of the things is looking at the site, looking what the site has, what you might have to rent. But in addition, there was an event that I was at, I was going to be the event steward, and somebody wanted to do an event with a $50 a person budget for the feast. Yeah, $50 a person. I'm like, I'm going to use a phrase that, well, okay, are you effing crazy? Okay, but when you do feasts, obviously you have to be realistic, first of all, about what the event is and how what the facilities are and how you're tying everything together. But you also have to be realistic about the budget itself. And you have a lot of people that come up with these, especially inexperienced cooks, let's be honest, lesser experienced cooks, who come up with these budgets for events, and then they end up spending hundreds of bucks out of their own pocket. And they should never do that. You should never spend money out of your own pocket, because first of all, you shouldn't be spending money out of your own pocket for it. Secondly, you shouldn't be spending money out of your own pocket. But third, it sets unrealistic expectations from people. You know, we're not going to give everybody foie gras, besides the fact I hate liver. But anyway. Okay.
Lou, if I might add something to that.
Yes. Yes.
Also regarding financing events in context of the feast and things like that, the feast budget should only support the feast. It shouldn't be there to offset the cost of the site. That's what the site fee is for, at least in our kingdom. You know, I don't know what other kingdoms, cultures, or policies are regarding what pays for what, but it's been my experience that the feast just pays for the feast itself, you know. So that's one I need to, one of the contribute.
Agreed. Agreed. Does anybody have a comment? Raphael, yes.
Yes, out here in the Outlands, the budget I get for the feast is to just cover the feast. It's not to offset anything else going on with the event. And I usually pull a profit, which is nice. I mean, that's, you got to keep the coffers, going. Otherwise, we can't have events. So making a little money doesn't hurt.
Wolfwin, you had your hand up as well. Just a second. You're on mute. There you go. Now I'll try.
I'm not. Just, I'm old. My hands are old and cold. One of the, in Trimeris, feast-crats have to feed 3 meals out of their feast budget, which is usually about, Philomena, what are we doing? $12 a head for food for the weekend?
Yeah, usually
Okay,
anywhere
so-
from 12 to 15 if you're doing high table or above the
Right.
salt or below the salt.
Yeah. So because we do weekend events almost exclusively, or we did before this, but I don't think that's going to happen anymore. At least not in the near future. But you have to budget yourself to feed Friday night travelers fare, which is usually, soup, stew and bread, something really cheap to make.
Apples.
Breakfast on Saturday and feast on Saturday night. We used to get 4 meals out of it. Not anymore. Feast-crats basically went on strike and said, no, you cannot ask us to serve 4 meals for the amount of money you would spend to buy a Big Mac meal at McDonald's. If you want lunch on Saturday, get some groups to do fundraisers and let them do a quick lunch. We used to do lunch as well.
Yeah, it's a little unrealistic to expect $10
No.
for meals
No,
for a weekend on $10 a person.
right. But the way I do it is I budget myself 50 cents a person for breakfast, 25 cents a person for traveler's fare, and then the rest of that 12 bucks goes into the feast. But you also have to practice really good portion control. I don't know. I mean, I remember when they used to come in and they would eat everything off the tables. But lately, at least for the last decade or so, the amount of food that people are willing to eat at feast has drastically dropped. And a lot of feast-crats don't understand that concept. So they're making 40 pounds of roast beef in their 4th course and expecting it to all be eaten. And you can't do that. So I have tight portion control for every single course all down through it. And there's no waste. My leftovers after a feast usually are contained in 2 1-gallon Ziploc bags. That's it. Those are all the leftovers. Because like the French, if you have leftovers, you didn't do your job. So portion control, portion control, portion control, portion control is the key to everything, which means that you have to cook that recipe. If you're using a recipe and you're cooking, it makes 6, feeds 6. Then you have to take that recipe, make it, weigh it, and then say, okay, how much of this am I going to feed everybody at the tables? 1/4 cup? Half a cup? 3/4 of a cup? Nobody needs more than half a cup of soup to start. They just don't. Because if they fill themselves up on liquid and bread, none of your other courses are going to be eaten the way you want them to. It just is. So portion control is key to everything. And a plan. Hey, Philo?
I would just like to say, as far as portion control as well, is being realistic on the portion control, and also your serving pieces have to correspond to the serving sizes. One of the stories that I tell is one of the first feasts, that Kingdom feasts, that I had gone to before I really started feast stewarding. They were sending things out, and the serving pieces were just kind of a little off, but they sent out for a table of 8 this tiny little cup of shrimp, of supposed to be honeyed shrimp, and this giant spoon. So the first guy that got it stuck the spoon in and took like 3/4 of the shrimp, and the other 7 of us are like, hello, there's 7 more of us, and we're fighting over like the 8 tiny little shrimp that are left, because it was like a little teeny tiny little salad shrimp. So I'm like, portion size, yeah, is good, but you have to be realistic about the portion size. And then also, don't send out a giant serving spoon for this tiny little cup of shrimp, because people are gonna, take more. Some people just have no concept of, hey, there's 7 other people at this table. I should just take a little small spoonful first and let everybody have some. And then if there's leftovers, I can take more.
Anybody else have a comment? Anybody else have their hand up? Just a second here. I see Percival. There you go.
Howdy, I'm Percival. I've been cooking in the SA since about, the early 90s. And I've noticed that there are 2 different avenues to the feast steward, feastocrat. There's mine, the artisan, the person that does the period cooking, and then there's the service-minded person that does the feastocrating out of, this is something that I need to do for the society because, or the local group, because it needs to be done. When those 2 collide, there's often a disaster. Anybody want to jump in? And because what I'm hearing most of you saying is you're more of the service minded or the service avenue, whereas my last feast that I did completely documented and entered it in our Baronio A&S championship.
Oh, every single feast I've ever done, you can document. And
mine's sort of a fusion, because I mean, I'm a Laurel in cooking, but I'm also a Pelican for logistics. So I do the research on figuring out what could be done, and then the logistics part comes in as what can be done given resources, equipment, budget, pricing, and everything like that. I might want to do this perfectly awesome Chinese feast and stuff like that, but if I don't have the equipment I need to pull it off, it's not going to happen. So you need to sort of be realistic. I mean, you really do need to have a theme in mind, a period theme in mind. We could do a feast on Platina or a feast on Taillevent or something like that. You can do your French feast, everything like that.
Actually, my last feast was Platina.
Yeah. I mean, I've done like, Platina's white torta often, frequently, and stuff like that.
Actually, that was in it. You bet.
Yeah,
Everybody loves it.
The ricotta tart. Yeah, the ricotta tart is great. But you do have to be, I think we do have to strive for having it as documentable as possible, but also be able to be produced as well as tasty. I like introducing little samples of things that might be a little bit edgy for people, just to give them a taste for it. But I'm not going to be serving, pike and galantine for everybody and stuff like that, because Midwesterners like their fish. Midwesterners like their fish square and deep fried. We're not a fish cult. We're not a fish culture up here.
We're in Trimaris, and a lot of our Trimarians don't eat fish.
Yeah, they won't eat fish either. Yeah, what's up with that? You guys have 3 C's. Come on, where's the fish? Come on, y'all got, grouper to feed an army, for God's sake. What's up with
I
that?
found that fish
Fish
never
is weird.
works.
Yeah. Fish is weird,
First course should always be a fish course according to all the cookbooks. but
right?
Fish never works. It always
That's
comes
like-
back. Nobody
serve
eats
like
it.
This much fish or eel pie or something like that. It has to be like this much, You can still do it, but it's like, something like that. But yeah, I definitely think there are people who are incredibly talented artisans who do wonderfully researched food and everything like that. But sometimes converting that to a scale, to scaling it up, is a bit of a challenge. So sometimes you have people who are incredibly talented who could do like, a incredibly period lunch for like 15 to 25 or a delicious queen's tea, but have them do that for a feast and it sort of goes off the rails and stuff like that. So there's definitely a balancing point for that and all that.
Wolfman
Okay.
had her hand up. Just a second here.
Okay.
I want to address the fish thing before anybody gets any further along. When you cook fish, overcooking your fish is a cardinal sin. Okay? Cardinal sin. Overcooked fish is bad. I grew up in New England. Okay? I can cook fish blindfolded with one hand tied behind my back. I served a full course of tuna, seared tuna, fresh tuna, in 4-ounce portions. It took 7 minutes to cook. That was it. And it was perfect and it was beautiful. I had people come up to me at the end of the feast and say, Mom, I don't even like fish, and that was great. I was like, yay. But most people do not know how to cook fish for themselves. So trying to get them to cook fish for 150 people is an impossible task for them.
Nicholas John has
Because it almost always turns out bad.
Nicholas John has a comment. Nicholas John, you have to unmute.
I thought I did. Okay. Yeah, as far as everything having to be historically documentable, as far as food wise, I disagree with that. We have a barony that serves Russian green almost every year at a certain event every year, and that's non-documentable, but I don't think they dare ever not serve it, or hell will break loose. And a lot of medieval cooking, if you cook it their way, does not match our modern tastes. And I will take yummy over anything else. And I think I'm not alone in that.
Yeah, that is my philosophy as well. Is you can cook a period feast and make it as documented and the methods as correct as can be, but unless people eat it, it's worthless. Which brings me back to what I was originally going to say when I did the conversions thing. If I can get a show of hands, how many of you have been the rescue feastocrat? Actually had to go in and bail somebody out because their feast was horrible. Yeah.
Done that.
Yeah. It's one of the hazards of being a well-known cook is when things start going wrong and you're trying to enjoy the event and not be cooking, getting roped into the kitchen happens, especially if it's your own local group and you were sitting this one out, and you see a mega fail happening. It's so hard not to get back in there.
Gwyneth has one here.
So I have a story
That's what I was gonna say.
about that. And this was a couple few years actually before I got laureled. I was also part of a traveling crisis management team in our kingdom where we just happened to go to events and people just happened to need a lot of help. And
traveling with you at that point too?
I beg your pardon?
Wasn't I traveling with you at that point too?
No, this is before you moved to the Midworld. You were still in Ethelmark. So this was this, and for a while, this has been for a while where I was going to a lot of events and traveling and just happening to be helping out in a lot of people's kitchens. And there was one event I was going to go to, I was really looking forward to. I made a pretty dress and everything like that. I was all dolled up. I was sitting down, ready to sit feast, and courses are coming out, and they're coming out kind of slow, and they're coming out, it's like, no, this is coming out, and this is coming out. I'm like, okay. And I'm sitting there going, I'm going to enjoy feast. I'm not going back in the kitchen. I am not going back in the kitchen. And someone comes out of the kitchen and gets me going, we have a problem. I'm like, okay. So I walk into the kitchen, and there are some of my compadres from this traveling crisis management team that was from like Kentucky, Southern Ohio, everything like that. And we were all slinging hash left and right. I mean, there was a landed baroness up to her elbows mixing honey butter. Someone was wrangling servers, someone was doing this. So I stripped off my pretty dress, got into, was there in my shift, and was just trying to get the food out and everything like that. And so it turned out, out of gratitude, they actually refunded my feast ticket after the fact, because I actually went in, worked the feast and everything like that. So sometimes there is a high price for your renown as a competent feast steward and saver of feasts and things like that. You get very popular all of a sudden. And so it was my holy mission after that to make sure that doesn't happen again. So that's where education comes in across the board, is to teach people things like feast management. I used to teach a 2-hour class with Sir William of Fairhaven about practical feast management. And we talked about everything but recipe planning. We talked about budget, staffing, equipment, this logistics and everything like that. But people may think they're really good home cooks, but they really suck at logistics. So we really had to work to educate people to get everyone on the same level so that we have a consistent reputation across the kingdom for solid, well-produced, well-run, well-eaten feasts and things like that. So that's really what our holy mission here as cooks is, to make sure that we have a fine reputation as tasty as some of the best doggone cooks in the kingdoms across the board and everything like that. So that's been my mission for almost 25 years.
Which brings me to my disaster story.
Okay, your turn.
So this probably one of the very last feasts in Anstiora, before COVID, I had planned this out to be my ANS entry for the baronial championship, and it was beautiful. Everything I did, all the boil and bag. My Laurel says that the way that I genuinely impressed him was I made soup and didn't burn the barley. So when you could serve soup to over 100 people and don't burn the barley, he's impressed. Where was I going? I'm sorry, I got lost. I lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry.
Well, that's a cooking disaster right there, when the cook loses their train of thought in the middle of the feast.
Yeah, that happens. Sorry.
So what went wrong with the dinner?
That thank you. That was the reminder I needed. Pre-event, you need to get word out, because I'm new to Anstiora, or newer to Anstiora, and I'm not as well known as I am in, say, Callantyre. People didn't know that if I'm cooking feast, you want to stay. I hate to toot my own horn, but I'm sure we're all in that caliber. If I'm cooking feast, people stay. And it didn't get put out on any of the event hype before the event. got put, none of it got put in the flyers. That is a disaster waiting to happen because nobody stayed. I had planned for 125 and I had about 60. It was really a financial disaster. Everything went really, really well. I mean, I had cooking worlds say this was one of the funnest kitchens they ever worked in, but you have to work with your autocrat and your advertisement people to let them know that before, get the word out there beforehand, get people psyched up for, I want to stay for this feast instead of I'm going out, which is the culture in Astiora, especially for
I think that's the
light
culture
weapons.
across the SCA, quite honestly.
For light weapon events, yeah, everybody goes out afterwards instead of, staying for what I even made limoncello, homemade.
Ooh, can I get some?
Yeah, I think I can ship it to you. I got another batch brewing. But yeah, Raphael was got something there, but it's just make sure that you've got, if people don't know what they're missing, they're going to be sad when they do. My meatballs are now legendary in Astiora.
So who had their hand up next? Was that
Raph did.
Raphael? Oh, just a second here. Let me unmute him here. There you go, Raphael.
So since we come across the subject of, rescuing on the feast, my first rescue was actually rescuing a barony. So 6 months before their 12th night, they had a feast steward, and 3 months later, he got put in the hospital and was probably not going to get out. So they got another feast steward. We're now down to 1 month before the feast. He went in the hospital, and sad to say, he actually passed 3 months after the feast.
Ooh.
So they got about 3.5 weeks, no feast steward for their 12th night. They're expecting about 120 to 150. And they put out for bids, and I made a bid, and I got it. And that one, I would have to say less is more. I just kept it incredibly simple, and it amazingly went off well, and everybody ate, and a good time was had by all. But yeah, that was 3 weeks to plan was a tight schedule. But yeah, that was a very sad, that when we started talking about horror stories, that one was, yeah, when I saw when they posted that they needed a feast steward 3 weeks to the event, I was like, wow, okay. And just I ran with it and managed to pull it off. I contacted another buddy of mine. He did cook in restaurants and stuff, and actually most of it was done by the two of us. So, but yeah, sometimes it's completely beyond your control when opportunity will knock.
By the way, I don't know if anybody saw the group chat over here, but Ashley Smith did say when we're following up, one of the things we were talking about the other day is that, well, not the other day, a few minutes ago, it's important to treat your volunteers with respect and appreciation no matter what you're doing. Okay, let's see here. Now, the one thing that I've noticed.
I pay my staff in ice cream.
Ooh,
Everybody knows
that too.
I pay my staff in ice cream.
I do cookies, ice cream, and if there's one nearby, Dairy Queen. Now, the one thing that I wanted to say you all is when I'm looking at what happens after a feast, I use the word wish. WISH. It's an acronym for what are you trying to achieve, identify pain points, summarize your experience, and honestly post-mortem the event. Because that's the one thing that the last point is where some cooks have issues with an honest post-mortem. They try to blame everybody but themselves if something goes wrong. When in reality, the buck always stops with us no matter what happened or how it happened. And so that's what where a lot of, shall we say, cooks that don't succeed end up. That's because that tends to make them fail in my eyes. They don't honestly post-mortem their feast. Anybody have a comment on that?
Isn't that why they call it a kitchen crew? You're the captain. You go down with the ship, right?
Or yeah, it's more like
I was going to say, I'm retired. I'm a retired Army NCO, and that just goes without saying. It's my business. I take care of my people. I get the job done. If anything goes wrong, it's my fault.
I see that Jenny put out something there. Did you want to go ahead and say what it was?
Yes. Also, sometimes when a feast is approaching crisis, sometimes the feast steward, the head cook, whoever is in charge is in a little bit too deep, and they try and usually the ego takes over and they try to muscle their way through, and it ends up they just end up failing. And it's really, and I really hate watching train wrecks, but at some point there is sometimes a point of no return where if they don't ask for help sooner, it's going to fail. And there have been times when there was a time when we had to actually stop a feast because it was unsalvageable. The feast steward had her own crew and her own way of doing things, and as much as the rest of us offered help and support to her, she refused to take it because she wanted to do it her own way. I'm like, okay. And at some point we had to say fish or cut bait. I mean, the Crown basically said, yeah, we need to stop this feast. It's done. And it's like, it was horrible. And I don't think the feast steward ever quite recovered from that experience. And the rest of us, it was a different team that wasn't my team, but the rest of us who had been there and done that, we're just like going, can't save this. And as much as we'd like to help, there was just no way of saving it. Yeah. So it's tragic. It's really tragic because the person is actually a good person. They just got in way over their heads. And that basically is could be any number of reasons. You know, they really want to make a good first impression. They're a pro chef, but they aren't an experienced SCA chef, things like that. There's so many factors that can cause something to fail. And it's just really heartbreaking to see it happen. But if they don't ask for help, it's really a tough choice when you have to go in and shove them out of the way for the sake of the feast and things like that. And it's something that no one ever wants to do and everything like that. So it's just very important to be realistic about what you can do and all that. So
Nicholas John did have a comment, and while he's commenting, I'm going to plug in my computer because the battery's about to die.
okay.
And I completely forgot what I was going to say. I'll be back. Oh, actually, I remember. There was one feast in which we had a very ambitious plan. The feaster had wanted to 4 different cuisines in a buffet style. You got a token per course, and you could token. You go to the opening course. You go to one of those 4, and you get your choice of options.
I know that
So you
feast,
could
by
eat-
the way.
Oh, you know that feast. Wonderful feast. Kind of messed up on one aspect, but wonderful feast. And what happened, you could take all 4 or 5 courses in one cuisine, or you can take a course from different cuisines. Great idea, very ambitious. She did a wonderful job. Unfortunately, quite often we were serving things before the food was brought out or before the food was prepared. What happened there was the expediter wasn't expediting, was her job. And I forget the tie-in to what we were talking about, but honestly, take a look at what happened, what could have happened, what should have happened, what the lessons learned. She was about ready after the thing was over to say, no, I'm not doing it again. But the takeaway was identify where the weakness was and make sure it doesn't happen again. So the person was not necessarily at fault. Maybe he was, she was, I don't know. All I know is they were saying food's ready and I didn't have but maybe one thing. And nobody really noticed it, which is great. Your audience, your diners won't notice what's happening in the kitchen, all the mess ups. We do, they don't. Hopefully they don't. And so honestly, take a look at it. So next time, if she were to do this, simply have a better expediter or pick somebody to make sure things work out a certain way. That goes back to honest evaluation, because if she wasn't honest, she would have took all the blame herself. In a
Okay.
comment.
Now, our time is starting to run down here. Wolfwin, let's see, I know you have a comment. Who else might have a comment if I can see hands for anybody? Okay, Wolfwin. All right, Wolfwin, you're next, and then we'll start winding down if that's okay with everybody.
Yeah. I just have some insight to doing 4 cuisine feasts because I've done them. Number 1, never ever do it as a buffet. It'll kill you. We did what is known now as the 4 feast prats of the apocalypse. We did French, German, Spanish, and English. It was pre-reserved. They had to pick their cuisine ahead of time. It was only for 120 people. So each cook, 160 people rather, each cook had to feed 40 people. So the logistics of it was a whole lot simpler. It worked really well. We chose 4 feast crats were people who have always worked in each other's kitchens. We all knew each other, and we had a $2 million kitchen to do it in. In most camp kitchens, it simply could not have been done. But we had 2 steam kettles. We had 4 convection ovens. You know, the place was humongous. It was a huge Boy Scout camp. And it was beautiful and it was wonderful. The hall sucked, but the kitchen was Feast Krat's wet dream. That's what we used to call it. But it worked. But the planning was amazingly difficult to get everybody to kind of, wrangling packs. You get them, when are you going to need this oven? When are you going to need this? When are you going to need that? And how often, how long are you going to need it for? But everything worked. It went off almost without a hitch. It was frightening in its ease of operation because we just didn't trip over each other. It was a huge kitchen to start with. But the concept of doing that as a buffet makes my brain explode. I could not even, that's a recipe for disaster right there. Buffet, I hate buffet feasts. I hate them with a passion. So it's just my bias, but I certainly would not try to do a 4 cuisine feast as a buffet line.
Family style works really well.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yes, family style works great. And in Trimaris, we have a solution for no servers signing up to help. The feast krat takes a spoon, a clean spoon, and goes out into the hall and walks around each table and pats some schmoo on the shoulder and said, "You are the server for this table. When I tell you there's food, you come get food." Nobody argues with a cook with a spoon.
I have to disagree with that because these people paid for dinner, and they deserve someone to serve them their food. So I disagree with that mindset. of expecting the person eating feast to serve their own dinner. But that's just that's my take on it. That's why I recruit servers and make sure they're fed for free, so that they give someone the dining experience and can pay attention to the feast, to help be part of the dining experience for that. But it's
always an emergency fix.
Yeah.
It's always an
Get in
emergency
contact
fix.
with
That-
your MOC and
That's
get the
standard.
page school to help out.
Yeah.
Okay.
MOC is a great resource.
While we're winding down here, I'm going to give one person a chance to tell their favorite horror story. Okay. And one person. And if I can see a hand, the first hand I see is the person who gets to tell their favorite food horror story, feast horror story. Philomena, you were first.
So this is a lesson in being a new feast steward. I had done several large scale fundraiser lunches. And so my household was holding the event, was autocrating the event, and they asked me to be the feast steward. This is going to be my first official like feast for our barony. And it was our 10-year anniversary. And, you know, my household is a bunch of crazy people. And I jokingly said to them, oh, ha, 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 wouldn't it be funny if we had 10 courses, one for every year of the barony? And the autocrat went, that's a fabulous idea. We're going to do that. And I was like, oh, what have I just gotten myself into? We had it planned, you know, we came up with 10 courses, which were just small dishes. I had, you know, portion sized out for exactly what, you know, tiny little portions. You know, I thought, okay, you know, I filled my friend's freezer with food. A week before the event, we go out to do the walkthrough to the kitchen just to see what's there. And because this site was notorious for them not really taking care of it. We go out to the site to do the walkthrough, and the kitchen is a disaster, to the point there was mold growing on dishes that had been left dirty in the sink. There was bug infestation. There were rat and mice droppings in the pantry. And I mean, it was just awful. We spent I don't know, an entire day there hosing down the kitchen just to be able to get it clean, like threw stuff away. There had been trash that had been left there for weeks. I mean, when I say it was disgusting, it was disgusting. 3 days or so before the event, we find out that the gas company has refused to refill the tanks because the line was so deteriorated that it was a hazard. So they refused to fill the tanks with gas. So we had no stove. So the camp has to jerry rig a residential electric stove into the middle of the kitchen so that I have a cooktop. Luckily they had a, 2 oven, convection oven, but they have to like jerry rig this residential electric stove, of which, because they jerry rigged it, only 2 burners worked. And we had to have a barony member who brought in their portable propane heater so that we could have gas, that we could have hot water, so that we could be sanitary and actually wash dishes. We had to go, like, people bring in grills and crock pots and, oven roasters. And we spent like 20 minutes, a half an hour scrubbing off the grill that they had in the back so that we could like cook the chicken on, because we had no stove. And, I was just like, we made it work. And I am pretty damn proud of myself that we had 10 courses that went out. The hot food went out hot. The cold food went out cold. And we pulled it off. But it was a nightmare in the kitchen. That was just like, we couldn't believe it. We went out there a week before the event, and the state it was in, and we're like, we're supposed to be running this in a week? Like, knowing that, and they had worked with us in the past, knowing that we come in to cook these big dinners, and this was the state that we found it in. It was a nightmare. Also, never jokingly and just say something to your crazy household members who then look at you and be like, that's a fabulous idea, we're gonna do it.
Thank you for that. That's hilarious. I'm going to end up with my one worst anecdote that I learned a lot from. When you're down in West Virginia cooking a feast, and this was this was about what, probably 15, 16 years ago now. No, actually more than that. More like 20 years ago, 20 or so years ago. I was down in West Virginia, and I asked for somebody if they would please donate some venison for an event. Okay, great. And they did. They donated lots and lots of venison. They told me they'd bring it out to the event for me, no problem. We'll never volunteer to cook an event where somebody's going to bring venison during cooking season, hunting season. Because I arrived there on the Friday night to find an entire deer in my kitchen. Wasn't cleaned. It was a whole deer.
I gotta say it. Oh dear.
Oh dear, yes. There was an adventure, but I fed the entire event from that venison. Oh, and I learned a lot. I will say that. Well, it wasn't even field dressed. No, not even. It wasn't even field dressed. It was somebody put an event there.
I guess at least it wasn't roadkill. Or maybe it was.
I don't think so. Don't think it was roadkill, but you never know with the person I was dealing with, you know. And by the way, I really can't talk like that because I used to live down there and I love people, West Virginia. Yeah, but let's just put it this way. Somebody took the antlers and made a hat for me, and they were little antlers too. And they made a hat for me for the event, the next event. Well, thank you, everybody. And you please enjoy food, enjoy cooking. And I so much look forward to seeing you all when this is all done, over and done with. Goodbye, everybody, and thank you.